Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Astromech Show. Big changes in the world of Warhammer 40,000. To kick off 2023, we are talking about the Arks of Omen Grand Tournament Pack. And in this episode, we're going to be covering everything you need to know to get your Genestealer cults ready for the tabletop. Real topside in the Arks of Omen, first thing you need to know that the detachment organization has changed quite a bit. So in the mustering armies step of the game is where we see most of the changes to Genestealer cults in the Arks of Omen. Now, some of these changes are going to impact how you build your list directly. Mostly these changes are going to impact how your opponents are building your list, as Genestealer cults already had quite a lot of flexibility in their list designs. So, in mustering your army, a couple things you need to know. A lot of stuff carried over from Nephilim. So you're going to start with 6 command points for a Strike Force mission. That's mostly where we're going to spend our time talking, since this episode is going to focus primarily on matched play stuff in the Grand Tournament Pack. The game is balanced at 2,000 points, which is a Strike Force, so that's where we're going to spend the bulk of our time analyzing. We're not going to get too much into incursion stuff, and Onslaught and Combat Patrol have been removed from the Grand Tournament Pack altogether. So, doing a Strike Force mission, you're going to start with 6 CP, same as a Nephilim, and the rules for regenerating CP also carry over from Nephilim. So you're going to start every turn, you're going to get a CP. So not just at the top of the battle round, but in your turn. Your turn and your opponent's turn, 1 CP, starting with 6. The stratagem for Warlord Trait and Warlord Relics are unchanged. It does continue to cost 1 CP for your first Warlord Trait and 1 CP for your first Warlord Relic. There's one other stratagem that has been added to the Arks of Omen Grand Tournament Pack, and that would be the Heroic Support stratagem. It's 1 CP, and it allows you to put in a character who is word locked in your codex to 1 per detachment. You can pay the 1 CP and include an extra one. So if you're playing orcs, you can include 2 war bosses in your detachment. Now, important thing to know about this, the only restriction on this stratagem, aside from being 1 per battle, is that it specifically calls out that it does not work with Genestealer. So sadly, Genestealer cults, we are still left with only 1 of each of our characters per detachment, and there is no way to take a second detachment. That brings us to the second bullet point. So the Arks of Omen, there is now 1 Arks of Omen detachment, and you can only include 1 Arks of Omen detachment in your army, so you can't take multiple detachments. But of course, because it's Games Workshop, there are some exclusions to that. There are some exemptions. There is a way to take other detachments for many armies. We'll get to that in just a minute. But let's start with just looking at the Arks of Omen detachment itself, because it is a pretty big change. So right off the top, you can see we have now, in as far as our compulsory picks, those red boxes there, what you have to take, we're going to have 1 HQ required, and then 3 of 1 particular battlefield role. So that can be troops, elites, fast attack, heavy support, Lords of War. Troops are no longer required for your army. Most armies are still going to want to take them because that's where your OPSEC is, as well as some changes to the secondaries. But right there you can see you just pick which battlefield role you really want to lean into, and that's where you're going to start. We'll be speaking specifically of the brooding variety of these brothers, and these are the rules for taking an allied detachment. So every faction is locked to 1 Arks of Omen detachment, and as far as Genestealers go, they can take a 1 allied patrol detachment, 1 allied auxiliary support detachment, or 1 allied super heavy detachment. You do still have to follow the rules in your codex, so there is still the point or power level limit in your codex, which is 25%. So 500 of your 2,000 point army, if you're at exactly 2,000 points, can be Brood Brothers. Now, I don't know that this makes a whole lot of difference competitively, because your Brood Brothers, your Astra Militarum units will lose a lot coming over into Genestealer cults. It won't affect what your Genestealer cults use, right? You still keep all of your same special abilities, crossfires, conceal, ambush, exposed, all that stuff. You still get to keep all of that stuff. You're not breaking any of your Battleforged rules, but your all of your Astra Militarum units will lose the regiment keyword, and they'll pick up the Brood Brothers keyword, so they don't have Born Soldiers. They don't get access to any of that stuff. They get a slight boost to their leadership. I think it's +2, and then they also get unquestioning loyalty. So, I think this is a great example of Games Workshop sort of threading the needle between match play, competitive play specifically. So there's like match play, and then there's like competitive play where the match play is taken super seriously. But between that and a sort of the more narrative side of the game, the more casual side of the game, because if you're a casual player, specifically if you're a narrative player, you definitely want ways to interact with Astra Militarum if you're Genestealer Cults, because it's a big thing for our lore and our fluff, but you don't necessarily want to give them access to a whole new codex. The other thing as far as detachments and mustering your army for Genestealer Cults that you need to be aware of is that strategic reserves are free. Now again, a lot of what changed in the Arks of Omen doesn't change Genestealer Cults specifically, but it is going to change the way everyone else around Genestealer Cults moves. Strategic reserves for free is like, ooh, la-da-da, let me introduce you to my ambush markers and my underground rules, right? Genestealer Cults have been able to do deployment shenanigans for as long as Genestealer Cults have been a thing. But the fact that everyone else in the game can now put up to, half their units into strategic reserve for free does probably change the way that you're going to deploy onto the board. Overall, Arks of Omen brings a lot of changes to the way that every player is going to be designing their army, right? Just because that Arks of Omen detachment is so different than everything we're used to. Now, as we saw in the first part of this video, those changes affect Genestealer Cults less than they do many other factions, but change at all is going to affect everybody. Now, the big changes for Genestealer Cults are going to be in secondaries, and this is where I think Genestealer Cults have an advantage, and why I think that they are going to stay fairly competitive in this new Grand Tournament pack. So right off the bat, there's 3 preset secondaries that every faction is going to get, and there's big changes to all of those. So we have Assassin, Grind Them Down, and Behind Enemy Lines. Now, those are all familiar, right? They've been around for a while. Assassin, 3 victory points for killing characters at the end of the game. A bonus 1 if you killed your opponent's warlord. The change here is that if you kill a unit with a troop or a troop equivalent, if you're a knight player, so Armiger or War Dog class models, you get 1 CP, right? If your squad of acolytes kills an enemy character, your army picks up a CP. So that's pretty cool, and that really incentivizes taking those 3, at least one of those 3 secondaries. Now, the core rules for the amount of CP refund that you can get per turn still apply. So if you took all 3 of those and you scored all 3 of them with troops, you'd still only get 1 CP. So I don't know in every scenario that it's advantageous to take all 3 of those. But certainly having one of them is really pretty key, could be pretty key, especially for a CP-thirsty army like Genestealer Cults. We have a lot of really good stratagems, so having the CP to utilize those is pretty important, especially in the late game. But there are some contenders for taking some of those preset secondaries out. Now, the rules for secondaries stay the same, right? You can take as they were in Nephilim. You can take as many faction-specific secondaries as you want, up to 3. But you can't double dip on any category, so they all have to still be from separate categories. So the Genestealer specific ones, right? So in Purge the enemy, we have Ambush, right? And you get 2 victory points for each of the following conditions that you meet, up to a maximum of 5, right? So 1 or more enemy units were destroyed while they had a crossfire marker on them. 1 or more enemy units were destroyed by a unit that was set up from ambush or underground. 1 or more units were destroyed while being exposed. And again, same as in Nephilim, that has to be truly exposed, not something like Priority Target from the Jackal Alphas, where a unit is treated as exposed. They actually have to be exposed. And then 2, if you meet all of the above abilities. Now, that's a pretty good secondary in Purge the Enemy. I think oftentimes it's going to be better than Assassin. Some armies are going to have a lot of characters, and some armies are going to have fewer, and some armies are going to have characters that are just kind of hard to kill. So I don't know that it's going to be easier for a Genestealer Cult army to kill enemy characters than it is to, say, kill something that has a crossfire marker on it. That's pretty easy. Killing something coming up out of conceal or ambush, you're going to be doing that all game, so you might as well score points off of it. The behind enemy lines in Battlefield Supremacy is just so easy for Genestealer Cults to get most of the time, right? Especially if you build your list around that secondary, or knowing that that's one of the secondaries you're going to get. And when we get into units here in a minute, we'll discuss this more in detail, but it's pretty easy. Now, other secondaries that I still think are very good for Genestealer Cults, Banners remains a very strong secondary for us. I like it. I like Banners. I've always liked Banners because if you get aggressive with it early on, turn 2, you get some guys out there, you get your banner set up. It's a way to pull your opponent towards you, make them come out of their areas and onto yours to get you off of those objectives to take your banners down. The last section for secondaries we're going to talk about real quickly, Warpcraft Rituals. I never thought that they were super useful for Genestealer Cults. There are some changes to a few of them in this mission pack, some points reductions, and some where you have to be. The big one, Psychic Interrogation, you now have to have line of sight. So that makes it less useful. The reason I've never bought into the secondaries for the Genestealer Cults is because of the Gensect rule. The maximum number of psychic characters you can get into your list is 2. I usually only end up with 1. It's either a Patriarch or a Magus. Sometimes it's both. But I've always found that my psychic phase can be used more efficiently for either maledictions or for blessings. The occasional Witchfire turn, sure. But the Broodmind Discipline has a lot of really good maledictions in it, as well as some pretty powerful buffs. So there are better ways to score points than relying on one Magus to go score you all of your points, because if it dies, you're SOL. And if you're using a Patriarch, the Patriarch is better suited for other things as well. So it's harder to kill than a Magus, but it's not the most efficient use of your points. So I didn't use them in Nephilim, didn't use them in Nachman, and I don't anticipate using them in Arcs of Omen. Looking at units themselves, interestingly enough, the units that were already performing well in Nephilim, I think are going to perform even better in Arcs of Omen. Bikes, even though they took a point change, so your Jackals are now 15 points. Still 5 points for a demolition charge. I still think with the changes to Armor of Contempt being gone, the power weapons, the Eidolon power weapons, go up in value. They're also free, so that's pretty nice. I think they were 2 points prior to that. So you can definitely kit out a squad. And if you're running a cult like Twisted Helix, right, where you're going to get +1 strength, and then the power weapon is going to give you +1 strength, so now you're a strength 5, AP -2. That's not bad in a world of no Armor of Contempt. I don't know if that alone makes Twisted Helix the way to go, but certainly an option. The true MVP winner of, I think, all the changes in Arcs of Omen. And if I'm being honest, since this codex came out, I've never had a game where I've ever regretted taking this model. It's just always earned back its points and then some for me. And we are, of course, talking about the one and only cowboy in Warhammer 40,000. We're talking the Keller Morph. Now, the real reason I think he's the big winner here, his points stayed the same, it was 80 points. But with Armor of Contempt being gone, he no longer needs the Relic pistol, the Wormtooth rounds, to really be effective, because he can still now fire 6 shot before bonuses or anything like that, right? He can get 6 shots, strength 5, AP -1, 1 damage, lying in wait, can come up 3 inches. All on his own, he can score you 3 victory points. You throw in some combinations he can do with some acolytes to get, an extra victory points and all that stuff. And his utility and versatility just continues to go up, on top of the fact that he ignores Lookout Sir. So if you did keep Assassin as your thing, he's a pretty good sniper. The big drawback, in my opinion, to Ridge Runners has always been that they're in the fast attack slot, and they've just never been able to compete with bikes. Now in the Arks of Omen, if you pick fast attack as your compulsory pick, you can still use 3 other fast attack spots. So I wouldn't be surprised if more Ridge Runners pop up. I don't know that 3x3, 3 units of 3, is ever going to be a thing again. It was for a little while in 8th edition. I don't think that's ever going to come back, but I think that there's enough versatility in the Ridge Runner, and now that it's not directly in competition with bikes, they're gonna make a resurgence. I think the Achilles missile launcher is still probably the weapon to take on that. AP -3, 3 damage is kind of like the perfect Terminator killing gun, or at least as close to perfect as you get in this codex. Okay, this one you might call me crazy because I almost never see him used. I still don't think he's going to be in like super top table competitive lists, but if you're doing something kind of fun at home and you want to pull, if you like me and you collected one of every character, because Pokemon's a thing, the Locust at 45 points with Fight First, right? Not a bad way to score 3 points, right? 45 points, he can pop up in your enemy's deployment zone, score you 3 points, charge into something, fight first, and then if you really want to, he's really easy to do the Return to Shadow strat on, because you can do it at the end of your fight phase after you make your attacks. Since you fight first, it's really difficult for your opponent to get any attacks in on you. Units that are still always going to disappoint you. And I am talking about Aberrants, and in a lot of ways I'm also talking about the Abominate. 27 points per model does make them better. I think if you really wanted to do the old Muscle Beach, lots of Aberrants, at 27 points, it's more attainable, but the amount of resources you have to put into that particular unit or two, right, is a lot. You need a Biophagus. You need the Alchemist Supreme upgrade. You need an Abominant, right? Like, there's a lot that you need to make that better. And the reality is always going to be that even if you can get the 5-up Feel No Pain on them to make them a little bit more durable, their armor saves suck. They're not as durable as you would think, and they're limited to 2 attacks on their profile. And paying 27 points for something that has 2 attacks and requires basically an entire army to buff is never really going to be like a super competitive choice. I think mirrored cults are still going to be the way that top competitive players build their lists. There are that mechanic in that codex to get 4 points and be able to spend them in various combinations really means that as you narrow in on exactly the units that you want in your list and you figured out all of your math hammers, you can pick out all the bonuses that are just going to check every single box that you need to hit for your army. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. I hope you found the information contained within it to be informative, enlightening, and inspiring to your own hobbying lists and endeavors. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe, hit the like button, ring the bell for notifications so that you know when more content comes out.